Hey everyone, love creepy stories? Then hit that subscribe button and join the creepy crew. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments. Now, let's get spooky. I'm Megan from Portland, Oregon. I met this guy Jake on Tinder. He looked normal in his pictures, cute, but not in a way that felt fake or too polished. Our chats were nice, easy. He was funny, and we seemed to click. After a few days of talking, he asked me out for coffee. We met at a little cafe near my apartment. In person, he was just as he seemed online. Relaxed, friendly. He asked good questions, made me laugh. Nothing about him set off any alarms. I'd had some weird dates before. Guys who talked only about themselves or gave off bad vibes. But Jake wasn't like that. He was attentive, polite. We met again a few days later. This time for a casual dinner. He paid, held doors open, and walked me to my car. He didn't try anything weird. No pressure. It was refreshing. I started thinking maybe this was going somewhere. By the third date, I felt comfortable. We met at his apartment this time. Something I normally wouldn't do this early, but I trusted him. He had a nice place, nothing fancy but clean, organized. We ordered takeout, watched a movie. It felt natural. But then, halfway through the night, he started talking about money. It was subtle at first, just complaints about rent going up, his job cutting hours. I nodded, sympathizing. But then he got more specific. He asked if I could spot him some cash. Just a couple hundred, nothing crazy. I laughed it off at first, thinking he was joking. But he wasn't. His face stayed serious. I told him I wasn't comfortable lending money, especially since we'd only just met. His expression changed instantly. He sighed, rubbing his face, then looked at me with this flat, unreadable stare. "I really thought you were cool," he said. "I guess I misjudged you." That was weird. It felt manipulative, like I was supposed to feel guilty. But I held my ground. "Sorry, but I don't think money should be part of this," I said. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "You should probably reconsider," he murmured, scrolling through his phone. "I mean, I have some pretty personal stuff from you. Those pictures you sent? You wouldn't want them getting out, would you?" I froze. I had sent him a few flirty photos, not full nudes, but still. Nothing that should have been a big deal, but in the wrong hands? It could ruin my job, my reputation. I forced a laugh, trying to downplay it. "You're joking, right?" His lips curled into a small smirk. "I don't joke about this kind of thing." I felt my heartbeat in my throat. "Delete them." "Sure," he said. "After we sort this out." I grabbed my bag. "I think I should go." His hand shot out, gripping my wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough to make it clear he wanted me to stay. "Come on, don't be dramatic. We're just talking." I yanked my arm free, forcing myself to stay calm. "I'll text you later." I walked out, not looking back. I didn't run. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing my fear. But inside, I was shaking. I got in my car and locked the doors. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone. A new message popped up from him. "Think about it, Megan. You don't want to make me your enemy." I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. This wasn't just some awkward date gone wrong. This was something else. Something dangerous. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that smirk, the way he had grabbed my wrist. I kept checking my phone, afraid to see another message from him, afraid not to. By morning, I had made up my mind. I needed help. I called my best friend Laura and told her everything. She was furious. "We need to look him up," she said. "Find his socials, anything." But when we started searching, something felt off. His Tinder profile was gone, deleted overnight. His number, when I searched it, was linked to an old Craigslist post under a different name. No Facebook, no Instagram, nothing. He had given me his last name. At least I thought he had. But there was no trace of a Jake in Portland. That's when the panic really set in. Who the hell had I been talking to? I went to the police. They listened, took notes, but their response was disappointing. Unfortunately, Unless he's actively threatening violence or attempting to extort money, it's a gray area, the officer said. We can't do much unless there's more concrete evidence. I showed them the messages. They nodded sympathetically but said, "It's best to cut contact and block him. If he escalates, then call us." That wasn't good enough. That night, I got another message. "Bad move, Megan. Now I have to teach you a lesson." I stared at my phone, my hands shaking. A second later, an email came through, from an account I didn't recognize. It had one attachment. I didn't want to open it. But I did. It was one of my photos, and underneath, a list of email addresses. Work emails. My family. My boss. I felt sick. Another message popped up. $500 by tomorrow, or they all get this. I broke down. Laura had to talk me through my panic, convincing me not to pay. "If you give him money, he'll keep asking," she said. "We need to fight this." I gathered everything, every message, every screenshot, and went back to the police. This time, they took me seriously. They traced the email account. It was linked to a burner phone. But then, they found something worse. Jake, or whoever he really was, wasn't just harassing me. He had done this before. He had different names, different profiles. Other women had filed reports, but just like me, they had been brushed off at first. Some had paid him to make him go away. Others weren't so lucky. One woman had her pictures leaked, her social media destroyed. She ended up moving states. The police launched an official investigation. Days passed. Then, an officer called me. "We have him." Jake, real name Daniel H., was arrested in a sting operation. Turns out, he had been blackmailing women for years, living off the money they paid him to keep quiet. When they searched his apartment, they found multiple phones, fake IDs, and folders of photos, hundreds of victims. I should have felt relieved, but the damage was done. Some of my photos had already been leaked. Not all, but enough. I had to have uncomfortable conversations with my boss, my family. My reputation at work took a hit. And worst of all, he made bail. I moved out of my apartment, changed my number. But sometimes, even now, I feel like I'm being watched. I'm Catherine, and I live just outside Denver, Colorado. I met Eric on Tinder. He was charming, articulate, and had this way of talking about life that made me feel like he really understood things on a deeper level. He wasn't like the other guys who just wanted to hook up. He seemed genuinely interested in me, my thoughts, my experiences. We chatted for a week before he invited me to a party with his friends. At first, everything felt normal. The party was in a nice house on the outskirts of the city, and the people were incredibly warm. They asked about my interests, my goals, my fears. No one was on their phones. No one was just making small talk. Every conversation felt intentional. They were mostly in their late 20s, a little older than me, and they had this calm, collected way about them. It was refreshing. Eric introduced me to his closest friends, David, Laura, and some others, whose names I forgot almost immediately. David had this magnetic presence, like he could look straight through you. He spoke in a low, soothing voice and kept talking about how lucky Eric was to have met me. It felt like a compliment, but something about it also felt rehearsed. Over the next few weeks, I kept seeing Eric. Every time we hung out, we were never alone for long. His friends always joined us. They were different from my usual crowd. They didn't drink much, didn't gossip, didn't seem to waste time on meaningless things. They talked about growth, self-improvement, breaking free from societal expectations. They had these deep conversations that left me questioning my own perspective on life. Then, one evening, Eric invited me to a gathering outside the city. He said it was a place where they could be themselves, away from distractions. I was curious. The way he talked about it made it sound almost spiritual, like something profound happened there. The place was a rented lodge deep in the woods. The second I arrived, I noticed something felt off. The house was lit only by candles, and people sat on the floor in a circle, whispering to each other. When I walked in, they all turned to look at me, smiling like they had been waiting. Eric led me to the center and introduced me again, but this time, it felt different. Everyone already knew my name. They spoke about me like I was already one of them. "We're so glad you're here," Laura said, squeezing my hands. David stepped forward and started talking about how everyone in the room had once been lost, trapped in a world that didn't understand them. But then they had found this group, this family, and their lives had changed. Someone dimmed the candles, and for a while, I just listened as they spoke about their philosophy. It was vague, but strangely compelling. Talk about shedding past burdens, embracing truth, finding real happiness. Then they started chanting something in unison, a phrase I didn't understand. I felt my stomach tighten. Eric turned to me and said softly, "You should try it. Just repeat after me." I shook my head. "I don't think I'm ready for this." The room went silent. David nodded like he understood. "That's okay, Catherine. But you need to understand something. This isn't just a group of friends. This is a path. And if you walk away now, you may never get another chance." A woman to my left placed a hand on my arm. "No one forces anyone to stay. But leaving means choosing to remain blind." I forced a laugh. "Look, I just thought this was a party." Eric's face changed. The warmth drained from it, replaced by something else. Something I couldn't quite place. "We wouldn't have invited you if we didn't believe in you," he said, his voice quieter. "But if you're not ready, we understand." I muttered something about needing to think and practically bolted for the door. No one tried to stop me, but I felt their eyes on my back the entire way out. Eric didn't text me that night, or the next. Then, after 3 days, he showed up at my apartment. I was surprised, but let him in. He sat on my couch completely relaxed, like nothing had happened. "I get it," he said. "It was a lot. I just want you to know that I still believe in you." I thanked him, hoping that would be the end of it. But the next day, Laura messaged me. Then David. Then 2 people I barely remembered from the gathering. They told me they were worried about me, that I was resisting something that could change my life for the better, that everyone felt a connection with me, and it was rare to find that kind of bond. Then, the messages changed. "You don't want to make the wrong choice, Catherine. Walking away from this means walking away from truth. You can't erase what you've seen. You can't pretend this never happened." A pit formed in my stomach. The next time Eric showed up at my apartment, I didn't answer. I watched from the peephole as he stood there for nearly 10 minutes before finally leaving. That night, I heard something outside my window, a soft tapping. When I pulled back the curtain, I saw a woman standing there, just standing, watching me. I didn't sleep that night. I kept checking the window, but the woman was gone. Still, I felt like I was being watched. I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows, turned off all the lights, and sat in silence, listening for any sound outside. My phone buzzed every few minutes. Messages from unknown numbers. "You can't ignore this forever. You're making a mistake, Catherine. We can help you, but you have to let us." I blocked every number, but new ones kept coming. The next day, my mom called me, her voice tight with worry. "Catherine, some people came by the house asking about you. They said you owed them something?" My stomach dropped. "They said you'd understand," she continued. "They asked if we knew where you were, but I told them nothing. Who are these people?" I tried to calm her down, told her it was a misunderstanding, but I could hear the fear in her voice. And the worst part? I had no idea what to do. I went to the police. I showed them the messages, told them about the people at my window, the strangers showing up at my parents' house. The officer I spoke to was polite but dismissive. "Nothing directly threatening here," he said, scrolling through my phone. "They haven't harmed you, haven't trespassed. It's creepy, yeah, but there's not much we can do unless they actually commit a crime." I left feeling even worse. That night, I stayed at my parents' house. I didn't want to be alone. My dad stayed up with me, keeping an eye on the driveway. Around 2 a.m., we saw a car slow down in front of the house, idling there for a moment before driving away. The next morning, my tires were slashed. I called Eric. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I could reason with him. Maybe I just wanted to hear him admit what was happening. He answered on the first ring. "You're scared," he said, like he was reading my thoughts. "I get it. But running from this won't make it go away." "What do you want from me?" I snapped. "It's not about me. It's about you." His voice was so calm, so steady. "You're at a crossroads. You can choose the right path, or you can keep pretending you don't see it." "Leave me alone," I said, my voice shaking. He sighed. "I hope you don't regret this, Catherine." Then he hung up. 2 days later, my mom got a call from an unknown number. A man told her I had a debt to settle. That if I didn't make things right, there would be consequences. That was it. I packed my things that night, quit my job over email. I didn't tell anyone except my parents where I was going. I drove for 14 hours straight, stopping only for gas until I crossed state lines. I started over in a new city, changed my number, deleted my social media. But even now, months later, I still get calls from unknown numbers. Sometimes I pick up just to see if it's them. Most of the time, it's silence. But once, just once, I heard a familiar voice whisper, "You still have a debt to pay." My name is Holly, and I live in Seattle. I met a guy named Zach on Tinder. He was attractive in a clean-cut way, had a great sense of humor, and we clicked instantly. Our first date was at a small cafe downtown. It went really well. We laughed a lot, talked about everything from movies to travel, and he seemed genuinely interested in me. He was charming, confident, but not in an over-the-top way. At the end of the night, he walked me to my car, gave me a quick hug, and asked if I wanted to meet again. I agreed without hesitation. For our second date, Zach suggested dinner at a trendy new spot. The evening started off great, just like the first time. The conversation flowed easily, and I felt even more comfortable around him. He had a way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room, keeping eye contact, leaning in slightly when I spoke. I was starting to really like him. After dinner, he asked if I wanted to come by his place for a bit. "Just for a minute," he said. "I need to grab something, and then I can drop you off." It felt a little sudden, but he'd been so respectful the whole time that I didn't see any harm in it. We drove to his apartment, which was in a quieter part of the city. The building was old but well-maintained, nothing particularly unusual about it. When we got inside, though, something felt off. The place was neat, but too neat. It didn't feel lived in. No decorations, no personal items, just the bare essentials, like a rental or a temporary stay. I tried to brush off the feeling, but then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Near the entrance, by the wall, was a pair of women's shoes. They weren't just left there casually, they looked placed, like someone had taken them off in a hurry and never came back for them. Before I could ask about it, a girl appeared from the hallway. She had red-rimmed eyes, like she'd been crying, and her hands were shaking. She looked at me, then at Zach, and then back at me again. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but before she could, Zach stepped between us. "Hey, don't worry about her," he said quickly, his tone suddenly different, dismissive, cold. The girl didn't move. She just stood there, staring at me, her lips pressed together like she was holding something back. I felt a wave of unease creep over me. Something was very, very wrong. My stomach knotted. The way Zach had stepped in front of me, the way the girl looked at me, it wasn't right. My instincts screamed at me to leave. "I should go," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I took a step back toward the door, but Zach didn't move. He just smiled, that same charming smile from dinner, but now it felt different. Forced. Almost mocking. No, he said smoothly. "There's no rush." I glanced at the girl again, silently begging her to say something, to explain. but she just shook her head ever so slightly, like she was warning me. I turned toward the door, my pulse racing, but before I could reach for the handle, I felt Zach's hand wrap around my wrist. Not hard, not yet, but firm enough to stop me. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice lower now. Amused. "Home," I said quickly, yanking my arm, but his grip tightened. That's when another man stepped out from the hallway. I hadn't even known he was there. He was taller than Zach, stockier, with a shaved head and dead eyes. He didn't say anything, just stood there, watching. The girl made a small, strangled sound, and that's when I knew. I wasn't just being paranoid. This was bad. I yanked my wrist again, harder this time. "Let me go," I snapped. Zach just laughed. "Relax, Holly. We're just hanging out." The other guy took a step forward. Panic shot through me like electricity. I lunged for the door, but Zach was faster. He grabbed me, twisting my arm behind my back, shoving me toward the hallway. I screamed, but the girl, she moved suddenly, stepping in front of me. "Stop," she said, her voice shaking. She's not like the others." Zach hesitated. He looked at her, then at me, like he was debating something. The other guy sighed like he was bored. I took my chance. I drove my elbow back as hard as I could, catching Zach in the ribs. He grunted, his grip loosening just enough. I twisted free, bolting toward the door. I heard them curse behind me, heard footsteps pounding after me, but I didn't look back. I wrenched the door open and ran into the hallway, nearly tripping over my own feet. The apartment was on the second floor. I hit the stairs at full speed, skipping steps, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I didn't stop running until I burst onto the street, straight into a group of people walking by. I stumbled, nearly falling, and one of them caught me. "Hey, are you okay?" a man asked. I turned, expecting to see Zach and the other guy right behind me, but the doorway was empty. They hadn't followed me outside. I gasped for air, trying to form words. I wanted to tell the strangers what had happened, to beg them to call the police. But my mind was spinning, my body trembling. And then I saw it. The window on the second floor. Zach stood there watching me. He smiled, then slowly closed the curtains. I went straight to the police. I told them everything. They went to the apartment, but by the time they got there, it was empty. No furniture, no Zach, no other guy, no girl. Like they had never been there at all. But they had been. The police found signs that someone had been staying there. They found a mattress on the floor, empty takeout containers, some rope, and worst of all, multiple women's IDs. None of them were mine. I later found out that some of the IDs belonged to women who had been reported missing. Women who had never been found. The police never found Zach or his friend. They just vanished. No last name, no digital footprint, nothing. Like ghosts. But they weren't ghosts. They were real. And they were still out there. I never used Tinder again. I'm Julia from San Diego. A few months ago, I matched with a guy on Tinder named Tom. He seemed normal, polite, decent looking, and had a good sense of humor. We talked for a few days before he asked me out to dinner. It was a nice place, not too fancy, just a cozy little restaurant downtown. He was charming, asked me about my job, my hobbies, even remembered little things I had mentioned in our chats. It felt easy, comfortable. Nothing about him raised any red flags. At the end of the night, I reached into my purse and realized I had forgotten my wallet at home. I was embarrassed, but Tom just smiled and said, "Don't worry, I got it." I offered to send him the money later, but he waved it off, saying, "It's just dinner. I had a great time." As we left the restaurant, he asked how I was getting home. I was planning to take an Uber, but he insisted on giving me a ride. "I swear I'm not a serial killer," he joked, and I laughed. It didn't feel weird. He had been a perfect gentleman all night. It was late, and I appreciated the gesture. The drive was uneventful, and when we pulled up to my apartment, he didn't try anything. No awkward lean-in, no pressure for an invite inside. Just a simple, "I'd love to see you again." I told him I'd text him tomorrow and went inside. Lying in bed, I thought about how rare it was to meet someone who was genuinely nice. Maybe this could turn into something real. The next morning, I was getting ready for work when I heard a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw Tom standing there, holding a bouquet of flowers. I hesitated before opening the door. "Hey, what are you doing here?" He grinned, holding out the flowers. "I just wanted to surprise you. Thought it'd be a nice way to start your day." It was sweet, but something about it felt off. We had only gone on one date. Showing up unannounced seemed like a bit much. Still, I didn't want to be rude. I took the flowers and thanked him, making an excuse about running late for work. He nodded, wished me a good day, and left. I told myself I was overreacting. He was just excited, maybe a little old-fashioned. But then, it happened again. A couple of days later, I saw him across the street from my office. He was sitting at an outdoor cafe, looking directly at me. When I stepped outside for lunch, he got up and walked over. "Hey, fancy seeing you here," he said, like it was some big coincidence. I forced a smile, chatted for a minute, then told him I had to get back to work. That weekend, I went out with friends. As I was leaving the bar, I spotted him standing near the entrance. "Julia," he called out, acting surprised to see me. "What are the odds?" I felt my stomach tighten. San Diego is a big city. These weren't coincidences. I started getting texts from him at odd hours. "Hey, saw you at the grocery store today. Looking cute." But I hadn't seen him. I had no idea he was there. Then one night, I was walking home from the bus stop when I got that creeping sensation of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a figure a few paces behind me. My heart pounded. I walked faster, and so did he. When I finally reached my building, I practically ran inside and locked the door. Peeking out the window, I saw him standing on the sidewalk, staring up at my apartment. I didn't sleep that night. I barely got any sleep that night. Every little noise made me jump. I kept checking the window, but eventually, Tom was gone. The next morning, I knew I had to do something. At lunch, I went straight to the police station. I told them everything. How he kept showing up, how he followed me home, the texts, the flowers, the constant coincidences. The officer listening to me nodded, but didn't look concerned. "Has he threatened you?" "No," I admitted. "But he's stalking me." "Has he tried to break into your home? Hurt you?" "No. But I feel unsafe." The officer sighed, almost annoyed. "Look, I get why you're uncomfortable, but he hasn't actually committed a crime. Unless he makes a direct threat or harms you, there's not much we can do." I left the station feeling worse than before. They weren't going to help me. It was just me against Tom. That night, I decided to text him, hoping to make him understand. "Tom, I need you to stop showing up. It's making me uncomfortable. Please respect my space." He read it immediately. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No reply. For the next few days, he was nowhere to be seen. No texts, no random appearances. I started to relax, thinking maybe I'd gotten through to him. Then, a week later, I came home late from work and saw something on my doorstep. A small, wrapped box. No note. My stomach dropped. I stared at it, debating whether to open it. My gut screamed at me to leave it alone, but my hands were already tearing at the wrapping. Inside was a necklace, a silver heart pendant. I dropped it like it burned me. I knew, without a doubt, it was from him. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I started looking for new apartments. I didn't care about breaking my lease. I just needed to get away. 2 weeks later, I moved across town. New address, new routine. I deleted my social media, changed my number. I told no one where I was going except close friends and my boss. For a while, things were quiet. I started to feel normal again. Safe. Then, one night, as I walked to my car in my new apartment's parking lot, I heard footsteps behind me. Fast. Purposeful. I turned, and there he was. Tom. I froze. My brain couldn't process it. How did he find me? He stepped closer. His face was different. No more fake charm, no more friendly smile, just blank, cold. Why did you leave? His voice was quiet, almost hurt. I couldn't move. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Tom, you need to go. You're scaring me. He shook his head. You don't understand. You're supposed to be with me. Then he reached into his jacket. I saw the flash of metal, a knife. Panic surged through me. My body finally reacted. I screamed, loud, desperate. A door slammed open nearby. My neighbor, a big guy in his 40s, ran out, holding a baseball bat. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Tom hesitated, just for a second. Then he bolted. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. My neighbor called the police, and this time they actually took me seriously. A restraining order was filed. They started looking for him, but he was gone, vanished. I packed my bags that night and left the city. I moved states, changed jobs, changed everything. That was 3 years ago. Every now and then, I still get the feeling I'm being watched. I check my surroundings constantly. I never take the same route home. My locks are double-checked every night. I don't use dating apps anymore. I don't think I ever will again. I'm Edward from Salt Lake City. A few weeks ago, I went on a Tinder date with a girl named Marisa. She seemed nice. Dark hair, bright eyes, confident, but not too much. We met at a small cafe downtown, nothing fancy, just a casual coffee date. The conversation was easy, but there wasn't much of a spark. We talked about work, hobbies, places we wanted to travel. She asked a lot of questions, which I took as a good sign at first. She wanted to know what I did for a living, what my schedule was like, if I worked late or traveled often. At one point, she even asked what part of town I lived in. I told her, without thinking much of it. I didn't give her my exact address, just the neighborhood. She nodded, said something about having a friend who used to live near there. The date lasted maybe an hour. At the end, there wasn't any awkwardness, just a mutual understanding that this probably wasn't going anywhere. We hugged, said goodbye, and that was it. No follow-up messages, no second date plans. Honestly, I forgot about her pretty quickly. 2 weeks later, I was walking home from a late shift at work. It wasn't too late, maybe 9:30, but my neighborhood was quiet at that hour. I had my hands in my jacket pockets, scrolling through my phone as I walked. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me. Before I could turn around, someone grabbed me from behind, yanking me backward. Another person stepped in front of me, punching me hard in the stomach. I doubled over, gasping for air. My head was spinning, and before I could react, they shoved me against the wall of a nearby building. One of them held a knife, pressing it against my side. Wallet, phone, now. I didn't argue. I pulled my wallet from my pocket and handed it over. My phone was next. The guy with the knife grabbed them and stuffed them into his hoodie. Then, just as fast as they appeared, they were gone, running off down the dark street, disappearing into the night. I stumbled forward, my head still spinning, my stomach aching from the punch. I tried to take a step, but everything around me blurred. The last thing I remember was my knees hitting the pavement before everything went black. I woke up in the hospital, my head throbbing, a dull ache in my ribs. A nurse told me I had a mild concussion and some bruised ribs, but nothing was broken. The police were there, waiting to talk to me. They asked me the usual questions. Did I see their faces? Did I recognize them? Did they say anything unusual? I shook my head. It all happened so fast. The only thing I knew for sure was that they had been waiting for me. They knew exactly when I would be walking home. They knew exactly where I lived. And that's when it hit me. The only person I had told about my neighborhood recently was Marisa. I told the police about Marisa. At first they seemed skeptical, like I was just grasping at straws. But then I mentioned how she had asked about my schedule, where I lived if I worked late. That got their attention. One of the officers nodded and jotted something down in his notebook. We've seen similar setups before, he said. Sometimes people use dating apps to find easy targets. If she passed your info to the wrong people, that could explain why they knew exactly when and where to hit you. That thought made my skin crawl. Had she set me up from the start? Had the whole date just been a way to gather information? I went home from the hospital feeling sick. I decided to dig deeper. I still had Maurice's Tinder profile, so I started searching online. I looked up her name, reverse searched her pictures. Nothing solid came up. Then I started looking through Tinder itself, swiping, hoping I'd find her again. After a couple of days I did, but her name wasn't Marissa this time. It was something else. Lena. And the bio was different too, but the pictures? Same girl. That's when I knew this wasn't just bad luck. I made a fake profile, swiped right, and matched with her. I started chatting, keeping it casual. She responded like nothing was wrong, like we were two strangers who had never met before. I played along, asking about her job, her hobbies. Sure enough, she asked me where I lived. That was all I needed. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to the police. It turns out I wasn't the only one. After filing my report, I started looking for others who might have had the same experience. I posted on local forums, Reddit threads, even reached out to people who had left bad reviews for women with different names but the same photos. I found 2 other guys. One had been robbed at gunpoint after a similar date. The other? His apartment had been broken into while he was at work. His place cleaned out completely. Both of them had matched with her under different names. The police finally took it seriously. They opened an investigation, but they didn't have much to go on. No real name, no solid proof she was directly involved. Just circumstantial evidence and a trail of victims. Weeks passed. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from an unknown number. "Hey, Eddie." My stomach dropped. It was a man's voice. "Hope you're not making too much noise about that little accident. Wouldn't want anything worse to happen." The line went dead. I moved out a month later. The police never caught her. Or them. Whoever they were. They disappeared, changed names, moved on to the next city. I lost thousands of dollars between medical bills, stolen property, and breaking my lease early. But the worst part? I lost my sense of security. To this day, I don't use dating apps. I don't tell new people where I live. And every once in a while, I still get strange calls, blocked numbers, silent voicemails. I know it's probably nothing. But I also know that someone, somewhere, still has my name, my old address, my old life. And they're not done yet. My name is Christina, and I live in Austin, Texas. I met Eric on Tinder, a typical office guy, clean-cut, charming in texts, nothing out of the ordinary. He wasn't overly flirty or pushy, which I liked. We talked for a couple of weeks before he asked me out for drinks on a Friday night. It seemed casual, no red flags. I wasn't desperate for a relationship, but I figured, why not? We picked a popular bar downtown, one I'd been to before. It was busy, but not overwhelming. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a high-top table near the bar. He waved me over with a smile. He looked just like his pictures, which was a relief. A lot of guys catfish, but he was exactly what I expected. Tall, dark hair, decent smile. I remember thinking he seemed comfortable, like he did this all the time. We started with small talk. Work, hobbies, the usual. He had a smooth way of keeping the conversation going, asking just enough questions to seem interested, but not so much that it felt like an interview. He told me he worked in marketing, nothing too exciting. I joked about my job in HR, how I had to deal with office drama all day. He laughed at the right moments, nodded at the right times. He ordered our first round, whiskey sours. I don't usually go for whiskey, but I didn't want to seem picky. The first sip was strong, but good. We kept talking, and when my glass was half empty, he flagged the bartender for another. I hesitated for a second, but he grinned and said, "Come on, it's Friday." So I took the second drink. That's when things started feeling off. At first it was subtle, a lightheadedness, a warmth spreading through my chest. I thought maybe I just wasn't used to whiskey. but by the time I finished the second glass, my limbs felt heavy. My vision blurred around the edges, like someone turned down the sharpness on reality. I blinked, trying to focus on Eric's face. He was watching me closely, his smile still there, but his eyes had changed. The friendly, easygoing look was gone. There was something else there, something calculating. "I think I need some water," I mumbled. My tongue felt thick, like I'd just woken up from a deep sleep. He leaned forward. "You okay?" I nodded, but I wasn't. I wasn't drunk. I knew what drunk felt like. This was something different. My thoughts were slipping, like I couldn't hold on to them for more than a second before they floated away. "I should go," I said, or maybe I just thought I said it. I wasn't sure. Eric stood up, tossing some cash on the table. "Yeah, let's get you home." I don't remember leaving the bar. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a dark room. My head throbbed, my mouth was dry. The air smelled different, stale, like dust, and something else, something chemical. I wasn't in my apartment. I was lying on a couch, my shoes gone. My heart slammed against my ribs as I tried to sit up, but my limbs were uncoordinated, like they weren't fully mine. My phone. Where was my phone? I patted my pockets, but they were empty. The room was barely lit, just the dim glow of a street lamp filtering through closed blinds. The furniture was mismatched, like it had been thrown together from a thrift store. A glass sat on the coffee table, half filled with water. My throat burned, but I didn't dare touch it. Then I heard footsteps. Eric appeared in the doorway, silhouetted by the light from another room. He was calm, too calm. "Hey," he said, like we were just hanging out. "You feeling better?" I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. Panic surged through me. "Where am I?" My voice came out weaker than I wanted. "My place," he said casually. "You weren't feeling great, so I brought you here. Figured you'd rather not wake up alone in some Uber." I swallowed hard. "Take me home." He tilted his head, like I was being unreasonable. "Christina, relax. You just need to sleep it off." I knew then I was in trouble. I forced myself to stay calm. Freaking out wouldn't help. I needed to think. My body still felt sluggish, my thoughts slow, but fear was cutting through the haze. "I need to go," I said again, firmer this time. Eric sighed, rubbing the back of his neck like I was being difficult. "Look, you were basically passing out at the bar. I was trying to help you." I tried to stand, gripping the arm of the couch for balance. My knees nearly buckled. My body wasn't right. I wasn't just drunk. I was drugged. I knew it now. "Where's my phone?" Eric shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe you left it at the bar." Liar. I scanned the room. The door was behind him. My shoes were nowhere in sight. My bag, gone. But I couldn't waste time worrying about that. I needed to get out. "Bathroom?" I asked, hoping to get him to move. He hesitated, then pointed down the hall. "First door on the left." I nodded, forcing my legs to work as I moved past him. He didn't follow. Good. Inside the bathroom, I locked the door and turned on the sink to cover any noise. My reflection in the mirror was terrifying. My pupils were huge, my skin pale, lips dry. I looked sick. I checked the window, too small to fit through. Damn. I opened cabinets, drawers, nothing useful. Then I saw it, his phone. It was sitting on the edge of the sink, screen face down. My heart pounded as I grabbed it and hit the side button. Locked. But there was one thing I could do. I held down the power button and the volume button at the same time. Emergency call. I dialed 911 and pressed the phone to my ear, praying Eric wouldn't hear over the running water. 911, what's your emergency? I whispered, barely above a breath. Help, I've been drugged. I don't know where I am. I heard movement outside. Heavy steps. Miss, what's your location? I don't know, I whispered. A house. He took my phone. A loud knock on the door. You okay in there? Eric's voice sharp now. I didn't answer. Miss, stay on the line, the dispatcher said. Eric knocked harder. Christina, open the door. I had seconds. I think I'm in Austin, I whispered. Eric, his name is Eric. I met him on Tinder. The doorknob twisted, locked. Eric cursed under his breath. Then, silence. He was getting something. I panicked. I had no idea what he was capable of. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a glass jar from the sink, and backed up. Then, footsteps, fast ones. But not from the hall, from outside. A loud pounding at the front door. Police! Eric's reaction was instant. Reaction was a sharp inhale, then retreating steps. I heard the door open, voices, then yelling. A crash, more shouting. I unlocked the bathroom door and stumbled out just as two officers tackled Eric to the ground. He was fighting, thrashing, cursing at them. One of the officers turned to me. Ma'am, are you okay? I nodded, but my legs gave out. I hit the floor. Everything spun. My body was shutting down. The last thing I remember was the officer catching me before I completely collapsed. Eric was arrested that night. Turns out, I wasn't his first victim. The police found my phone hidden in his kitchen, along with others. He had done this before. The worst part? He almost got away with it. His lawyer pushed the narrative that I had been drunk, that he was just trying to help. But the evidence was too strong. The drugs in my system, the call to 911, the other women who came forward. He's in prison now, but it doesn't feel like enough. I don't go on dating apps anymore. I don't take drinks from strangers. Hell, I barely go out at all. I was lucky. That's what everyone says, but I don't feel lucky. I just feel like I survived. My name is Brenda, and I'm from Atlanta. I met Nate on Tinder, and from the very start, everything seemed perfect. He was charming, attentive, and actually put in effort. Flowers, good morning texts, thoughtful little surprises. It felt like he really wanted something serious, and honestly, I hadn't met a guy like that in a long time. He was the kind of man who made you feel like you were the only person in the world when he looked at you. I fell fast. But there was one thing that always struck me as a little strange. In the weeks we'd been seeing each other, we always met at my place or out somewhere, never at his. I brought it up once, jokingly, asking if he was hiding some deep, dark secret, and he just laughed it off, saying his place was a mess and not girl-ready yet. It was a little weird, sure, but not a deal-breaker. Some guys are just private, right? One night, we were out to dinner, and his phone lit up with a notification while he was in the restroom. I wasn't trying to snoop, but my eyes caught the screen. The message was short. Don't forget about Alice. When he came back, he saw me looking at his phone and immediately flipped it over. His reaction was off. Too quick. Too defensive. I raised an eyebrow and asked, "Who's Alice?" He chuckled nervously and waved it off. Work thing. You know how it is. Except I didn't. Because Nate had told me before that he worked in marketing, and I couldn't think of a single reason why his job would involve remembering an Alice. Something in my gut twisted, but I let it go. That night, when I got home, curiosity got the best of me. I typed Alice missing Atlanta into Google, and there she was, Alice Parker, missing for 2 weeks, last seen leaving a bar. The more I read, the colder I felt. She looked so normal, just a regular girl, smiling in photos with her friends. There was nothing in the articles about suspects, just the usual pleas from family and police for any information. But something about that text wouldn't leave my mind. The next time I saw Nate, I casually asked if he'd ever heard about the missing girl. He barely reacted, just said something vague like, "Yeah, I think I saw something about that online." But his voice was flat. No curiosity, no sympathy. It was like he was commenting on the weather. That was when the nagging feeling in my stomach turned into something worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, when I got home, I did something I never thought I'd do. I started digging. I went back through Nate's social media, looking for anything that felt off. But his profiles were spotless, almost too spotless. No old photos, no casual posts, just perfectly curated pictures, like someone trying too hard to look normal. So I dug deeper. I searched for missing women in Atlanta over the past year. At first it felt ridiculous, like I was being paranoid. But then I found another name. Sarah Mitchell. Vanished 3 months ago. And another. Lena Rodriguez. Gone 5 months ago. I clicked on their profiles, and my heart nearly stopped. I scrolled through Sarah's pictures, and there he was. Nate. Commenting on an old post. Just a simple looking great with a winking emoji. I checked Lena's account. Same thing. I felt sick. These weren't random women. He'd interacted with them, maybe even dated them, and now they were gone. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? What could I even tell them? That my boyfriend left a weird comment on a missing girl's profile? That he got a text about an Alice who happened to be missing? It wasn't proof. It was barely even suspicion. So I tried something else. The next time I was with Nate, I mentioned Sarah's name. Just slipped it into conversation like I assumed he knew her. I watched his face carefully. For a split second, his expression changed. It was small, but I caught it. The slight tightening of his jaw. The flicker of something in his eyes. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. "Who?" he asked, all casual. I forced a smile. "Oh, I thought you knew her. She's missing too." He shrugged. "That's awful. A lot of people go missing though." And that was it. No questions. No curiosity. Just nothing. That night, I decided I had to end things. I didn't know if I was overreacting, but I wasn't going to be the next girl whose name showed up in a news article. I texted him, telling him I needed space. He didn't argue. Just sent a short, almost cold message. "If that's what you want." I blocked his number, deleted his social media, told myself it was over. But then, the nightmares started. For weeks, I felt like I was being watched. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was guilt. But every time I walked to my car, I felt eyes on me. Every time I was home alone, I swore I heard noises outside my apartment. One night, coming home from work, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A car, parked across the street. Not unusual, except I recognized it. Nate's car. He was just sitting there, not moving, just watching. I forced myself to act normal. Walked inside, locked every door and window, and called the police. They sent someone out, but by the time they arrived, the car was gone. "There's nothing we can do unless he actually threatens you," the officer said. I barely slept that night. The next evening, I left work late. The parking garage was almost empty, the kind of quiet that makes every little sound feel louder. My footsteps echoed as I walked toward my car. Then I heard another set of footsteps. I froze, listened. The sound stopped. I turned around. Nothing. Heart pounding, I started walking again, faster this time. My keys were already in my hand. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was just the echo. Then, as I reached my car, I saw movement in the reflection of the window. A shadow. Behind me. I spun around just in time to see someone duck behind a pillar. I didn't think. I just ran. I sprinted back toward the elevator, toward the stairwell, anywhere but there. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone, trying to call 911. Then I heard it. A voice, low, calm. "Brenda." It was him. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I made it to the stairwell and ran down 2 flights before bursting out into the street. There were people outside. Lights. Safety. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. Again. They took my statement, but it didn't matter. There was no proof, no crime. Just my word against nothing. I moved the next week, changed jobs, changed my number. For a while, I thought I was safe. Then, a month later, I saw the news. Another missing girl. Same age. Same area. And when I looked at her social media, my stomach dropped. Nate had liked her last post. "My name is Sheila, and I live in Chicago." A few weeks ago, I matched with a guy named Vincent on Tinder. He seemed perfect, charming, intelligent, well-spoken. His profile had pictures of him traveling, smiling with friends, and even one of him with a dog. We chatted for a while before he asked me out for dinner. He suggested a small Italian restaurant downtown, one I'd actually been meaning to try. He was polite, funny, and didn't push anything, which made me feel comfortable. After a few days of texting, I agreed to meet him. On the evening of our date, he offered to pick me up. Normally, I wouldn't accept a ride from someone I hadn't met in person, but he seemed so normal. He even joked, "I promise I'm not a serial killer," which, looking back, makes me sick to my stomach. I hesitated, but eventually said yes. He pulled up in a dark blue sedan, clean and well-kept. When I got in, he smiled, complimented my outfit, and played soft jazz in the background. He smelled good, like expensive cologne, and his demeanor was confident, but not overbearing. Everything seemed fine. We made small talk as he drove, laughing about bad Tinder dates and weird profile bios we'd come across. But about 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed something. The route didn't make sense. I knew the general direction of the restaurant, but Vincent was taking a different way. I figured maybe he knew a shortcut, but the further we went, the more I realized we were heading in the opposite direction. I shifted in my seat. "Hey, isn't the restaurant downtown?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't look at me. His hands stayed firm on the wheel. "Yeah," he said simply. "But we're going the wrong way," I pointed out, forcing a small laugh, hoping he'd realize the mistake. That's when he finally turned to me with a strange smile. "You got in my car," he said, his tone light, almost amused. A chill ran down my spine. Something about the way he said it, slow, deliberate, made my stomach knot. I reached for my phone, but he glanced down and smirked. "Looking for something?" My heart pounded. Relax," he cut me off, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "We'll be there soon." I forced myself to stay calm, but my breathing was shallow. I looked out the window, trying to get my bearings. We were heading toward the outskirts of the city, where the streets were darker, less busy. I didn't know where exactly, but it wasn't anywhere near where we were supposed to be. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Vincent, I need you to turn around. I don't want to do this." He let out a short laugh. "Do what? We're just going for a drive." "No, I want to get out," I said, my voice firmer. He didn't respond right away. The air in the car felt heavier. Finally, he sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "You're overreacting," he muttered. "We're just taking a detour." My hands were sweating. I considered opening the door, but we were going too fast. My mind raced, searching for options. I could call someone, but what if he saw and grabbed my phone? I could scream, but the streets were empty. I could fight him, but he was stronger, and I was trapped in a moving car. Then, suddenly, he turned down a narrow road, surrounded by trees. No streetlights, no houses, just empty space, My pulse was hammering in my ears now. I swallowed hard. "Where are we going?" Vincent didn't answer. He just kept driving. I knew I had to do something. My fingers gripped my phone tightly, but when I tried to discreetly unlock it, Vincent reached over and snatched it from my hands. "Not a good idea," he said calmly, slipping it into his pocket without even looking at me. Panic shot through me like ice. This was real. This wasn't some bad date, some misunderstanding. I was in danger. My mouth was dry, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. "Vincent, please, let me out," I tried again, my voice shaking. He sighed, almost annoyed. "Sheila, just relax. You're fine. Stop making this difficult." Difficult? My breath hitched. My hands were shaking, my body locked in place. I glanced at the door handle. If I jumped now, no. We were still moving too fast. Then, out of nowhere, he turned sharply onto a dirt road, the tires kicking up dust as we sped deeper into nowhere. Trees loomed on either side, the world narrowing into darkness. I couldn't see any houses, any streetlights. Just trees and emptiness. Where are we going? My voice was barely above a whisper. You'll see. That was it. That was the moment I knew. If I didn't do something now, I might never come back. I reached for the door handle again, this time ready to take my chances. But before I could yank it open, Vincent's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Hard. Don't, he said, voice flat, his fingers digging into my skin. I twisted, tried to pull away, but he was strong. Too strong. My stomach clenched. He was still driving with one hand, barely even paying attention to the road. Like this was normal for him, like he'd done it before. And that thought, the idea that I wasn't the first, made something snap inside me. I swung my free hand at him, clawing at his face. He cursed, momentarily letting go to shield his eyes, and that was all I needed. I yanked the door handle and threw myself out. The impact was brutal. Gravel tore into my skin as I hit the ground, rolling hard. Pain exploded through my side, but I didn't stop. I forced myself up, legs screaming in protest, and ran. Behind me, I heard tires screech, a door slamming. Sheila! I didn't look back. I ran blindly, deeper into the trees, branches whipping against my arms and face. My body ached, my breathing was ragged, but I kept going. I could hear him crashing through the brush behind me. Stop running! Tears blurred my vision. I was going to die out here. No one knew where I was. No one would find me. Then, lights. I almost didn't believe it. A house. A real, actual house at the end of a long, winding driveway. My legs were giving out, but I forced myself forward, stumbling toward the porch. I barely made it up the steps before pounding on the door. Help me, please! Footsteps inside. The porch light flicked on. A man opened the door, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm when he saw me. Bleeding, shaking, sobbing. Jesus Christ. Before I could say anything, Vincent's car sped off behind me, tires screeching as he disappeared into the night. The police were called. They took my statement, took photos of my injuries, assured me they'd find him. But they never did. And the worst part? I wasn't his first victim. A week later, a woman reached out to me on social media. She'd seen my story after it spread online. She had gone on a date with Vincent months before, but she never made it home. Her sister had been searching for answers ever since. And now, after everything, I can't help but wonder how many others there were. Or how many there will be, because Vincent is still out there. And I know he won't stop. I'm Tyler from San Francisco. A few months ago, I matched with a woman named Jess on Tinder. She was fun, outgoing, and we hit it off quickly. After a few dates, though, I realized we weren't really a good match. Nothing dramatic happened, just one of those things where the chemistry wasn't quite right. I figured the best thing to do was to be upfront, so I sent her a polite message explaining that I didn't see this going anywhere long term. She didn't respond, which honestly, I took as a good sign. No drama, no awkwardness. Just a quiet end to a short-lived thing. A week later, I got a message from an unknown number. Hey, asshole, you think you can just ghost people? I didn't recognize the number, but I knew it wasn't Jess. I hadn't ghosted her, and she wasn't the type to talk like that. I ignored it. Probably a wrong number or some scam. Then, the next day, I got another text. Different number. You're gonna regret treating women like shit. This one made me pause. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but the wording felt personal. I thought about Jess for a second, but it didn't seem like her style. Maybe just some bot spam, some weird online prank. I blocked the number and went on with my day. The messages didn't stop. Over the next few days, I got at least a dozen more, all from different numbers. Some were just insults, others were more disturbing. Hope you don't mind people knowing the real you. You should be careful walking alone at night. Enjoy your new reputation, loser. By now, I was genuinely freaked out. I went back through my messages with Jess. I never sent anything mean. No ghosting, no arguing, nothing that would justify this kind of reaction. It had to be a coincidence. Had to be. Then my phone started blowing up with notifications from Facebook, Instagram, even my work email. People were messaging me, some laughing, some pissed off, some disgusted. Someone had made fake accounts using my pictures, my name. They were posting bizarre, offensive things, racist comments, aggressive DMs to women, even threats. There were fake Tinder profiles under my name with bios that read, "Looking for something violent," or "Love breaking hearts, ruining lives." I felt like I was losing my mind. I reported everything, but new accounts kept popping up faster than I could get them taken down. Then the calls started. At first, they were just prank calls, people calling to mock me or curse me out. Then, I started getting calls from strangers offering services, escorts, drug dealers, people asking about arrangements I supposedly made online. The worst part? Some of these people didn't sound like scammers. They sounded real. "Hey man, you still need that job done? You got my number, so just say the word. Listen, I don't normally do this over the phone, but you seemed serious in the messages. You need it done or not?" I told them they had the wrong number. They insisted I had reached out first. One guy even read out a conversation he supposedly had with me. It was all stuff I never wrote. By this point, my co-workers were starting to notice. Someone had sent emails, dozens of them, under my name to my boss, my colleagues, even some clients. They were full of insults, unhinged rants, threats. One email to my manager simply said, "I know where you live." I had a meeting with HR. They were concerned. They said they understood that maybe I was being hacked, but I could tell they didn't fully believe me. Why would they? To them, it looked like I had a secret online life that was now spiraling out of control. I thought about calling the police. But what could I even say? Someone is making fake profiles of me and ruining my life? It sounded ridiculous. I tried to track down who was doing it. I went through every message, every fake account. I started recognizing patterns, the way certain sentences were structured, the kinds of insults used. And then, I saw it. One of the fake profiles used a photo of Jess. Different name, different bio, but the picture was definitely her. That's when it clicked. I confronted Jess. At first, I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if someone had stolen her picture the same way they were stealing mine? But deep down, I knew. The wording, the persistence, the way every attack felt personal. It had to be her. I sent her a message. "Jess, I know what you're doing. Stop now, or I'll go to the police." No response. An hour later, another fake account appeared. This time, it messaged my boss directly. "Tyler is a predator. If you don't fire him, we'll make sure the whole world knows." That was it. HR called me in again, this time with security. They were concerned for the company's reputation. They weren't outright accusing me of anything, but it didn't matter. I was done. I lost my job that day. After that, things only got worse. I was locked out of my bank account. Someone had reported it as compromised. My credit card was maxed out on purchases I didn't make. My home address was posted online alongside fake Craigslist ads saying I was selling drugs. I had random people knocking on my door at all hours, some looking for a fight, others looking for a good time. I finally went to the police. They barely took me seriously. The officer I spoke to nodded along, took a few notes, and said he'd see what he could do. Nothing came of it. Meanwhile, Jess disappeared. Her number was disconnected, her real social media accounts wiped clean. It was like she had never existed. But her ghost still haunted me. Weeks passed, then months. Every time I thought it was over, another fake account appeared. Another round of emails, another wave of threats. I couldn't keep a job. I couldn't date. Every time I tried, something would surface. Some old post, some fake message. People didn't want to deal with the drama. One night, I sat in my dark apartment, staring at my laptop, exhausted. I had spent the entire day emailing websites, trying to remove yet another batch of false information. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I ignored it. It buzzed again. Then a text. "Still thinking about you. Hope you're doing well. 3." I stared at the screen. My stomach turned. My hands shook. I didn't respond. I just turned my phone off and sat there in silence, realizing the truth. This was never going to stop. I'm Daniel, from Phoenix, Arizona. A few weeks ago, I matched with a girl named Candy on Tinder. She was cute, blonde, had a kind of effortless, laid-back vibe in her pictures. We started chatting, and she seemed really into me. Quick replies, lots of compliments, asking me about my job, my interests. It felt nice. After a few days of talking, she suggested we meet up. She said she didn't have a car, which wasn't super weird. Lots of people in the city don't. She gave me an address and asked me to pick her up. It was in a neighborhood I wasn't too familiar with, but not far from downtown. The area was a little run down, but nothing that immediately set off alarms. When I pulled up to the address, it was just a row of older apartment buildings, the kind with chipped paint and flickering porch lights. The street was quiet. Too quiet. No cars, no people walking around, just a couple of dimly lit windows. I texted her, "Hey, I'm outside." A few minutes passed. No response. I waited, drumming my fingers on the wheel. Then another text. "Be right there, just finishing up." I sighed and leaned back, scrolling through my phone. 5 more minutes. 10. The streetlights hummed and a dog barked in the distance. Something felt off. Not in a dramatic way, just a low, nagging feeling in my gut. Maybe I was overthinking it. Then I saw movement. A figure stepped out from the shadows near the building. My pulse slowed when I realized it wasn't Candy. It was a man. Then another. Both wearing dark hoodies, moving fast. Too fast. Before I could react, they were at my driver's side door. One of them yanked it open, and I barely had time to raise my hands before a gun was pressed to my ribs. "Get the FK out, now!" My stomach dropped. My body froze. "Move!" I scrambled out, hands up, my heart slamming against my chest. The taller guy grabbed my phone, shoved me back against the car. The other one, shorter, stockier, started digging through my pockets. My wallet was gone in seconds. Then, like some sick joke, I saw her, Candy, standing a few feet away near the apartment entrance. She wasn't running, she wasn't calling for help. She was just watching. The taller guy climbed into my car, while the other one grinned at me, his teeth yellow in the dim light. "Wrong place, wrong time, man." The engine roared to life. I stumbled back, barely catching myself as my own car peeled away, tires screeching. Candy smirked. Then she turned and walked off into the night like I never existed. I stood there, shaking, my mind racing. My car was gone. My phone was gone. My wallet, gone. I felt exposed, helpless. The street was still empty, like the whole world had just watched me get robbed and decided to look away. I ran. I didn't even know where. I just needed to get out of there. After a few blocks, I found a gas station and stumbled inside, out of breath. The cashier looked up, eyes widening. "You okay, man?" I got robbed," I stammered. "They took everything." He let me use the store phone to call 911. I could barely keep my hands steady as I explained what happened. The dispatcher told me to stay put. A few minutes later, 2 cops walked in. One was taking notes before I even finished talking. "You said her name was Candy?" the officer asked. "Yeah, matched on Tinder. She gave me an address." The 2 officers exchanged a look. "This isn't the first time," the other one said. "Same setup. Girl lures the guy in, guys show up, armed robbery. We've had 3, maybe 4 cases in the past few months." My stomach turned. "So she's real? She's actually involved?" "She's real," the first cop nodded. "But not in the way you thought." They took my statement, asked for any details I could remember. I described the guys, the car, the location. "You think you'll find them?" I asked. The cop sighed. "We'll try. But these guys are careful. Fake profiles, stolen cars, no witnesses. Even if we catch them, proving anything is hard." I sat there, numb. Everything was gone. And worse, I wasn't the first. Probably wouldn't be the last. Days passed. I kept checking my email, hoping for updates from the police. Nothing. My car never turned up. Insurance barely covered anything. My bank account took a hit, replacing my phone, my cards, everything. And the worst part? The fear. Every time I got a text from an unknown number, my chest tightened. Every time I walked to my car, I looked over my shoulder. Every time I even thought about downloading Tinder again, my stomach twisted. I kept wondering, was she doing this to someone else right now? Was another guy sitting in his car, texting her, thinking he was about to have a great night? The police never caught them. My car was probably stripped for parts, my stuff sold off. Candy, or whatever her real name was, just disappeared. And me? I learned the hard way that some people aren't just playing games on dating apps, they're hunting. I'm Michael from New York. A few weeks ago, I matched with this girl on Tinder. Her name was Lisa. She was cute, had a good sense of humor, and our conversation flowed easily. After a few days of texting, we agreed to meet at a small cafe in Brooklyn. It felt normal, nothing sketchy. I got there a little early, picked a table in the corner, and ordered a coffee. 10 minutes passed. Then, 15. I checked my phone. No messages. Just as I was about to text her, a man slid into the seat across from me. Mid-40s, average build, wearing a dark hoodie and a serious expression. "Michael?" he asked. I hesitated. "Yeah?" "I'm Trevor," he said, leaning forward. "Lisa's not coming." I stared at him, confused. "What?" "Lisa's not real," he repeated. "I made that profile." I gave a half laugh, thinking this was some kind of weird joke. "Okay. So what do you want?" His expression didn't change. "I need you to listen very carefully," he said, his voice low but firm. "You owe me." I frowned. "Owe you for what?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, tapping on the screen before sliding it across the table to me. My stomach dropped. There, on his screen, was a photo of my apartment building, another of my front door, and then one of my parents' house upstate. I pushed the phone back toward him. "What the hell is this?" "Relax," he said, taking the phone back. "You're not in trouble. Not yet. But you are gonna help me out." My pulse was hammering in my ears. "I don't even know you, man," he smirked. "You do now." Trevor leaned back, watching me carefully. "I know where you live, where your parents live, where you work. It's not hard to find these things out." I felt a cold sweat creeping in. "What do you want?" "Money," he said simply. "Not a lot, just enough to make sure you stay on my good side." I scoffed, trying to mask my nerves. "This is a scam." He nodded. "Sure, call it that if you want, but I'd think carefully before ignoring me." I grabbed my phone from the table, ready to call the police. Trevor didn't flinch. Instead, he scrolled on his own phone and turned the screen toward me again. This time, the photos weren't just of my apartment. They were of me. Walking to work, coming out of my gym, sitting on my own balcony. I felt my throat tighten. "You see," he said, "this isn't random. I've been watching, and you don't want to know what happens if you decide to be difficult." "How do I even know you're serious?" I forced out. He smiled. "You don't. But are you willing to risk it?" I exhaled slowly, looking around the cafe. People were chatting, sipping coffee, completely unaware that my entire world had just tilted off its axis. "How much?" I asked. "For now, 1,000. I clenched my jaw. I had the money, but that wasn't the point. "And if I pay?" "You'll be safe," he said simply. "For now." I gritted my teeth. "And if I don't?" Trevor's face darkened. He leaned in just enough for me to hear him over the cafe noise. "Then bad things happen, Michael. To you, to the people you love. It's your call." I sat there staring at him, knowing that no matter what I chose, this wasn't going to end well. I paid him. That first time, at least. I transferred the money right there in the cafe while Trevor watched, nodding approvingly when the transaction went through. "Good choice," he said, before standing up. I'll be in touch." And just like that, he was gone. I sat there for a while, my coffee cold, my hands shaking. My mind kept telling me I should go to the police, but what would I even say? Some guy catfished me, took pictures of my apartment, and asked for money. They'd probably tell me there was nothing they could do. A week passed, then another. I almost convinced myself that it was over, that I'd paid, and he was done with me. But then, late one night, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to look. Tomorrow, same amount. Don't make me remind you why. My stomach sank. I turned off my phone and went to bed, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, I left for work like normal. As I walked down my street, my phone vibrated again. Another message. "Nice blue jacket. Looks good on you." I froze mid-step. My jacket was blue. I glanced around, my heart pounding, but I saw nothing. Just people walking, a guy with a coffee, a woman with a dog. That's when I knew. He wasn't bluffing. That night, I paid again, and the week after, and the week after that. But it didn't stop. It only got worse. The messages became more personal. "Your mom leaves for work at 7:45. She parks near the bakery on Main. Your dad gets home at 6:30. He should really lock his back door." I felt trapped. If I stopped paying, I had no doubt something would happen. I couldn't live like this forever, but I had no way out. I finally went to the police, sat in a station for 2 hours, explaining everything to a detective who scribbled in his notepad and nodded along. When I finished, he sighed. "We need something concrete," he said. "A real crime, not just threats." "Are you serious?" I asked. "He's stalking me. He's blackmailing me." The detective shrugged. "Technically, you're just giving him money." I walked out of there furious, helpless. That night, for the first time in my life, I felt real fear, because now I knew no one was going to save me. I ran out of money. I stretched it as long as I could, but eventually, I just couldn't keep up. My bank account was drained, my credit cards maxed. The next time Trevor texted, I told him I didn't have anything left. He didn't respond. Not right away. Then, a few hours later, I got a new message. A photo. It was my apartment door, spray painted in red with the words, "Last warning." I felt sick. I rushed home, but by the time I got there, the door was clean. No paint, no sign anything had happened. Like he wanted me to know, but not the world. The next day, my parents started getting calls, anonymous numbers, a man breathing on the other end before hanging up. My mom called me, panicked. "Michael, what is going on?" I lied. Said it was probably just a scam. That night, I sat in my dark apartment, waiting for something to happen. A knock. A break-in. Something. Nothing came. And then, the next morning, I woke up and my apartment was empty. Everything was gone. My TV, my laptop, my furniture. Even my fridge had been cleaned out. But the worst part wasn't the robbery. The worst part was the message left behind. Carved into my bedroom wall, deep enough to splinter the wood. "You should have kept paying." I packed a bag, took what little I had left, and left the city. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I deleted my socials, changed my number. My parents moved too. I don't even think they fully understand why. I just told them it was for their safety. And now? Now I live on the other side of the country, in a place where no one knows me. I keep a low profile, no dating apps, no online presence, no routine that anyone can track. But sometimes, late at night, I still wake up to my phone buzzing. Unknown numbers. I never answer, but I never turn it off either. Because deep down, I know this isn't over. My name is Hannah. I'm from Boston. I met a guy named Nick on Tinder. He seemed normal, funny, easy to talk to. Our first date was great. We walked around downtown, grabbed coffee, and talked about music and books. He had this effortless charm, the kind that makes you feel like you've known someone forever. No red flags, nothing weird, just a really nice evening. A couple of days later, he asked me out again. This time, he suggested we go for a drive. "Let's get out of the city for a bit," he said. I liked the idea. It felt spontaneous, different from the usual dinner or drinks. Plus, I already felt comfortable with him. We met in the afternoon. He picked me up in his car, a black sedan that was clean, but smelled faintly of cigarettes. He laughed when I pointed it out. "Bad habit," he admitted. "I'm trying to quit." The drive started off fine. The roads were quieter as we left the city, trees lining the streets, the sky a dull gray like it might rain later. We talked about work, travel, the places we wanted to visit. Every now and then, he glanced at me and smiled, like he was genuinely happy I was there. About 30 minutes in, the atmosphere shifted. "I think you'll like where we're going," he said. His voice was different, lower, more serious. "Where is it?" I asked, suddenly aware that I had no idea. He didn't answer right away. Then, as if it was the most normal thing in the world, he said, "Tonight, you're staying with me, whether you want to or not." I let out a short laugh, waiting for him to grin, to tell me he was joking. But he didn't. His hands gripped the wheel a little tighter. "What?" I said, forcing a small smile. He reached over and took my phone from my lap before I could react. He pressed the power button, turning the screen black. "You don't need this." My stomach dropped. "Nick, stop messing around." "I'm not." I grabbed for my phone, but he shoved it into his jacket pocket, keeping one hand on the wheel. "Nick," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Turn the car around. Right now." He didn't even look at me. "Relax," he muttered. "You'll be fine." My pulse hammered in my ears. I glanced at the road ahead, empty, stretching into nowhere. No houses, no gas stations, just trees and the occasional road sign. I swallowed, forcing myself to think. If I panicked, I'd lose control. I shifted in my seat, testing the door handle. Locked. "Where are we going?" I asked again, my voice quieter now. Nick let out a slow breath, like I was annoying him. "Someplace nice." My hands clenched into fists. I looked out the window, searching for any sign of a car, a person, anything. But there was nothing. Just miles of road and the dull hum of the tires against the pavement. I glanced at him, trying to read his expression. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I needed a plan. I waited until we slowed down at a curve in the road. Then, without thinking, I reached for the wheel and jerked it hard to the right. The car swerved violently, tires screeching as Nick cursed, yanking it back under control. "What the fuck are you doing?" he snapped, slamming on the brakes. I didn't wait. The moment the car stopped, I fumbled with the lock, threw the door open, and bolted. I heard him shout my name, the sound of his door swinging open behind me. My legs burned as I ran, my sneakers slamming against the asphalt. There was nothing around, just the road, the trees, and the sound of him coming after me. I ran toward the shoulder, praying for a car, for anything. But the road stretched empty in both directions. I chanced to glance back. He was closer than I thought, his face twisted in frustration. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Hannah." I didn't answer. I just ran. Then, up ahead, I saw him. A man walking along the side of the road, wearing a gray hoodie and carrying a backpack. My only chance. "Help!" I screamed. "Please, help me!" The man turned, confused at first, then alarmed as he saw Nick behind me. Nick must have realized this was going south fast, because he slowed down, his whole posture changing. "She's overreacting," he called to the stranger. "She's my girlfriend. She's just upset." I reached the man, breathless, grabbing his arm. "He took my phone," I gasped. "He won't let me leave." The guy's expression hardened. He looked from me to Nick, then pulled out his own phone. "I'm calling the cops." Nick's face twisted with anger. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, taking a step forward. The man held up a hand. "Back off." For a second, I thought Nick might try something. His hands curled into fists, his body tensed like he was about to lunge. But then a car approached from the other direction. Nick hesitated. The car slowed as the driver, a woman in her 40s, rolled down her window. "Everything okay?" she asked, looking at me first. Probably because I was shaking, barely holding myself together. The man beside me answered, "No, she needs help." Nick knew it was over. He let out a breath, stepping back. "You're insane," he muttered, shaking his head. He turned and walked back to his car. He didn't run. He didn't argue. Just got in and drove off like nothing happened. I stood there shaking as the man and the woman asked if I was okay, if I needed a ride. I barely registered their voices. My heart was still racing, my mind screaming at me that this wasn't over. Because Nick had my phone. He knew my number, my address. And he didn't seem the least bit worried about being caught. A few days later, the police found him. Or, more accurately, they found his car abandoned outside the city. Nick himself was nowhere. He wasn't at his apartment, wasn't at work. He had vanished. For a while, I tried to go back to normal. But then, the texts started. "Unknown number. You got lucky. Unknown number. I know where you live." I changed my number, deleted social media, moved in with a friend for a while. But the feeling never left. That heavy, suffocating weight of knowing he was still out there, watching. Weeks passed, then months. The police told me there wasn't much they could do unless he actually did something. They said I probably had nothing to worry about. But they didn't see his eyes that night. They didn't hear his voice when he said, "You're staying with me, whether you want to or not." And they didn't get that last text I got before I finally left Boston for good. Unknown number. See you soon. I'm Jay from Los Angeles. A few weeks ago, I matched with a girl named Bree on Tinder. She was gorgeous, long dark hair, bright green eyes, and this confident, playful way of texting that made me want to meet her as soon as possible. After a couple of days of chatting, we set up a date. Nothing fancy, just drinks at a bar downtown. The night started out great. She showed up in a tight black dress, smelling like expensive perfume, and I was instantly hooked. We laughed, drank, flirted. Everything felt easy. At some point, she leaned in and whispered, "Want to go somewhere more private?" I was tipsy, feeling good. And of course, I said yes. She suggested a motel just outside the city. "More discreet," she joked, tracing her nails along my wrist. I didn't question it. We took an Uber there, and I paid for the room. It was a cheap place, the kind with flickering neon lights and a guy at the front desk who barely looked up from his phone. The room itself wasn't much better. Stained carpet, old TV, the faint smell of cigarette smoke, but I didn't care. We sat on the bed, and she pulled out a bottle of wine from her bag. "To a fun night," she said, clinking her plastic cup against mine. I took a sip, and that's when things started to blur. At first, I thought it was just the alcohol hitting me too fast. My limbs felt heavy, my head cloudy. Bree was watching me closely, smiling, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something I didn't like. I tried to speak, but my tongue felt thick. My vision blurred, and suddenly, the world tilted. Then, nothing. When I came to, the room was dark. My head pounded like I'd been hit with a hammer. My mouth was dry, and my body felt sluggish, like I'd been drugged. I tried to sit up, but something felt wrong. The room was empty. Bree was gone. I blinked, trying to clear my vision. That's when I noticed. The place was ransacked. My jeans, my jacket, my backpack, all gone. I reached for my phone. Not there. My wallet? Gone. I stood up too fast and nearly fell over. My car keys. I checked the nightstand, the floor, even under the bed. Nothing. A cold realization washed over me. She took everything. Even my clothes. I was standing in nothing but my boxers in a shitty motel room, completely wiped out. I stumbled to the door, yanked it open, and stepped out into the dimly lit hallway. My heart pounded in my chest. I needed help. My car was still in the parking lot, if I could just get to it. But when I reached the lot, I froze. My car was still there. But without keys, it was useless. And then another thought hit me. If she had my wallet, she had my ID, my address, my credit cards. I was screwed. I hurried back inside to the front desk, barefoot, my head still spinning. The guy behind the counter barely looked up from his phone. "I need help," I said, my voice shaky. I was robbed. The girl I was with took everything. My wallet, my phone, my keys. "Do you have cameras? Can you check?" He finally looked at me, then sighed, like he'd heard this before. "Cameras don't work," he said flatly. "Been broken for a month." I stared at him. "Are you serious?" He just shrugged. I felt sick. My whole body was buzzing with panic, but I forced myself to think. I needed to call someone. "Can I use your phone?" I asked. Another sigh. "Fine, make it quick." I dialed 911. The cops showed up about 20 minutes later. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both looking tired. They listened as I explained what happened. The woman took notes while the guy asked questions. "Name?" "Bree," I said. "At least, that's what she told me." They exchanged a look. "Do you have a last name? A number? Anything?" I shook my head. "Just her Tinder profile, but my phone's gone." The woman officer nodded. "We've seen this before." That made my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "Same setup," she said. "Girl meets guy online, gains his trust, suggests a private spot, drugs him, robs him. Usually works in pairs. Sometimes there's a guy waiting outside." I felt cold all over. "So what do I do?" The guy officer handed me a form. "File a report, cancel your credit cards, get new keys for your car. But I'll be honest, these women use fake names, fake profiles. They're ghosts." I signed the paper with a shaking hand. "What about my car? My house keys were in my pocket." The officer frowned. "Change your locks. And if you have GPS on your car, track it. These guys don't just take wallets." A bad feeling settled in my gut. I thanked them, but I knew it was pointless. They weren't going to find her. One of the motel workers gave me a t-shirt and some old sweatpants from Lost and Found. I looked ridiculous, but at least I wasn't naked anymore. I borrowed the motel phone again and called a friend to come get me. The whole ride home, I couldn't stop thinking about what the cops said. If they've done this before, what if they're not done? I barely slept that night. The next morning, I borrowed another friend's phone to check my accounts. My credit cards maxed out, my bank account drained, and then I got the worst call of all. The police. "Mr. Lawson, we found your car," the officer said. Relief flooded me, until he continued. "It was abandoned on the side of the freeway, stripped, engines gone, wheels gone, it's a total loss." I felt like I was going to throw up. That car wasn't even paid off yet. Insurance covered some of it, but not enough. I was left paying off a car that no longer existed. On top of that, I had to get new locks for my apartment, replace everything she stole, and figure out how to rebuild my savings. But the worst part? They never found her. I tried everything. Reported her profile, gave the police every detail I could remember, even searched social media for someone who looked like her. Nothing. It was like she never existed. And according to the cops, I wasn't the only one. This wasn't just a one-time scam. This was a business, and I was just another name on a long list of victims. I still think about that night, about how easy it was, how fast it all happened. One drink, one bad decision, and I lost everything. I met Taylor on Tinder. She seemed nice, pretty, funny, normal. We chatted for a bit, and after a few days, we agreed to meet up for dinner. It wasn't anything fancy, just a casual burger place in downtown Dallas. The date itself was fine. No major red flags, no awkward silences, but also no real spark. We had some polite conversation, but it was clear that neither of us felt that connection. By the time we finished eating, I knew I wouldn't be seeing her again, and I got the impression she felt the same way. She was nice though, friendly, polite. So when she said her ride had canceled on her and asked if I could give her a lift home, I didn't think much of it. Her place was only about 15 minutes away, and I wasn't the kind of guy to just leave someone stranded. She smiled, thanked me, and we walked to my car. The ride was uneventful. She didn't talk much, just scrolled on her phone while I drove. The only time she said anything was when I missed a turn, and she corrected me. But even that felt off. She gave me a different route than the GPS suggested, one that took us down some quieter streets instead of the main road. I didn't question it. People prefer different routes to their own homes, right? When we pulled up outside her apartment complex, she quickly unbuckled her seatbelt and grabbed her purse. "Thanks, Josh," she said, flashing me a small smile before stepping out of the car. No awkward goodbyes, no fake promises to text later. It was just a date that didn't work out. I was about to shift into drive when the back door suddenly opened. Before I could react, someone slid into the back seat. I barely had time to turn my head before I felt something cold press against my neck. Drive. My heart nearly stopped. I could see his face in the rearview mirror. A guy, mid-20s, shaggy dark hair, intense eyes. He held a knife so close to my skin that I barely dared to swallow. "Drive," he repeated, his voice calm but firm. I hesitated for a second, my mind racing, trying to process what the hell was happening. Then he pressed the knife harder against my skin. "Now!" I put the car in drive. The first thing that hit me was that Taylor was gone. She hadn't screamed or tried to warn me. She had just walked away like nothing was wrong. And then it clicked. This wasn't random. She had led me here. I drove. My hands were slick on the wheel, my breathing shallow. The guy in the back didn't say much at first, just told me which turns to take. The roads got darker, emptier. We were moving away from the city, towards the outskirts. I knew I had to do something, but I had no idea what. "Where are we going?" My voice barely came out steady. He didn't answer right away. When he did, it was casual, like we were just two guys talking. "Don't worry about it. Just drive." I swallowed hard. "Look, man, I don't have any money. You can take my wallet, my phone, whatever you want." "Shut up." I shut up. The knife never left my skin. It wasn't pressing as hard now, but it was there. A constant threat. I felt my pulse hammering in my throat. We drove for what felt like forever. The streets got more deserted. Streetlights became rare. I had no idea where we were anymore. I glanced at my phone mounted on the dash, but I didn't dare try to reach for it. Then he told me to pull over. I pulled over. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep my grip on the wheel. The road was dark and empty. No houses, no businesses, just a stretch of cracked asphalt with nothing but trees on either side. The guy leaned forward, his breath hot against my neck. "Turn off the car." I hesitated. He jabbed the knife against my ribs. "Now." I killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. He finally moved the knife away, but I wasn't stupid enough to think I was safe. He sat back and ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply like he was psyching himself up for something. "You know Taylor, right?" The question caught me off guard. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. "Yeah," I croaked. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, I bet you do." He shook his head, then leaned forward again. "She set this up. You get that, right?" I didn't say anything. "She told me she was meeting some guy. Said it was nothing. But you see, I know her. I know how she is." He let out a slow breath. "So I had to make sure." His words sank in. He thought she was cheating. He thought I was the guy she was cheating with. "You're her ex," I said before I could stop myself. His grip tightened on the knife. "I'm not her ex," he said, his voice sharp. "She's just confused right now." I felt sick. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't random. This was something worse. Before I could think of what to say, he suddenly grabbed my phone from the dashboard and tossed it onto the floor in the back seat. Then he pointed at a house up ahead, barely visible through the trees. "Drive up there." My stomach dropped. "I don't know what's going on between you and Taylor, and I don't really care," he continued. "But you're gonna help me send a message." My hands clenched the wheel. I wanted to do something, floor the gas, try to run. But every option ended with that knife in my ribs. So I drove. The house was run down, windows covered with cardboard, a busted-up car in the driveway. I had no idea whose place this was, but I could feel the tension radiating off him as we pulled up. He yanked the keys from the ignition and got out, motioning for me to follow. I didn't move. He sighed, then opened my door himself. "Don't make me drag you." I stepped out, my legs weak beneath me. We walked up to the house. He banged on the door twice, fast and hard. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open. A guy stood there, mid-40s, sunken eyes, a cigarette dangling from his lips. His gaze flicked between me and my captor. "That him?" the man asked. "Nah," the guy with the knife said. "This one's just the ride." The man grunted, then turned and walked back inside. The guy with the knife grabbed me by the arm. "Stay put." Then he stepped in and slammed the door behind him. I stood there frozen. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I had no idea what was happening inside, but I knew I didn't want to be around when it was over. I looked around. The road was empty. No cars, no lights. My phone was still in the car. Running didn't feel like an option, but I had to do something. Then, from inside the house, shouting, a crash, a muffled yell. I didn't think. I just ran. I barely made it 2 steps before something slammed into me from behind. I hit the dirt hard, pain exploding in my leg. When I looked down, I saw the knife buried deep in my thigh. I screamed. The guy grabbed my collar, yanked me up. "You shouldn't have done that," he hissed. Then, headlights. A car was coming down the road. Not fast, just normal speed. But in that moment, it was everything. The guy hesitated. I used that split second to rip free and stumble toward the road, waving my arms frantically. The car skidded to a stop. A man and woman inside stared at me, eyes wide. "Help," I gasped. Behind me, the guy took off, sprinting into the woods. The couple got out, called 911. I barely remember what happened next, just flashes. The paramedics, the police. Me sitting in the back of an ambulance, bleeding all over the place. The cops searched the house, but it was empty. No sign of the guy, no sign of the man inside. Taylor never responded to my messages. Never explained. Never apologized. I spent a week in the hospital. The cops never found him. Never found her either. And I haven't used Tinder since. I'm Alana from St. Louis. I started dating a man named Andrew. He told me he was recently divorced and looking for something serious. We met on a dating app, and from the beginning, he seemed like the perfect guy. Charming, attentive, always checking in to see how my day was going. He had a steady job, owned a house, and talked about how he was finally ready to build a new life with someone. I wasn't looking for just a casual fling, so his seriousness felt refreshing. Our first few dates were great. He planned thoughtful outings, made reservations at nice places, and even surprised me with little gifts. Nothing extravagant, but things that showed he listened. My favorite coffee, a book I mentioned in passing. He had this way of making me feel special, like I was the only thing that mattered. After about a month, he invited me over to his place for dinner. His house was spotless, almost too perfect, but I brushed it off. He cooked a fancy meal, poured expensive wine, and we spent hours just talking. He opened up about his past, how his marriage ended because his wife became cold and stopped appreciating him. He made it sound like he had tried everything to save the relationship, but she had already checked out. The first sign that something was off was small, barely even noticeable at the time. I went to grab something from the bathroom, and there, in the back of the cabinet, was a pink razor. A woman's razor. I hesitated but convinced myself that maybe it was old, something left behind. He had been married, after all. When I came back, I casually asked how long he'd been divorced. He hesitated, just for a second. Then he smiled and said, "Almost a year now." I ignored the small knot forming in my stomach. I wanted to believe him. Then, Out of nowhere, I got a phone call. A woman's voice, low and urgent. "Is this Alana?" "Yes." "You need to leave him. Run while you can." I froze. "Who is this?" "I'm his wife." The line went dead. My heart was pounding. I stared at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. His wife? But he told me they were divorced. What did she mean? Run while you can? My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe she was just a bitter ex, trying to ruin things for him. That's what I told myself. That night, I confronted Andrew about it. He sighed, shaking his head, like he was exhausted by the drama. "That's just my ex," he said, rubbing his temples. "She can't handle the fact that I moved on. She's been trying to sabotage my relationships ever since the divorce." Something about the way he said it, so calm, so dismissive, made me feel foolish for even bringing it up. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was right. But then the calls kept coming. Unknown numbers. Voicemails of just heavy breathing. Once, I answered, and the same woman's voice said, "Please, listen to me. You don't know who he really is." Then she hung up again. I started to feel uneasy around him. He noticed. "You're acting distant," he said one night as we sat on his couch. His tone was light, but his eyes were sharp, watching me closely. "You're not believing her, are you?" I forced a laugh. "Of course not." His expression relaxed, but I felt something shift. Something dark. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woman's warnings echoed in my mind, and the way Andrew had reacted, too calm, too controlled, made me uneasy. I decided to dig a little. We had mutual friends through work, so I casually asked around. At first, people were hesitant to say much, but eventually I got bits and pieces. Andrew wasn't divorced. He was still married. His wife had tried to leave him multiple times, but every time she did, something happened. Her car got vandalized, her tires slashed, her work emails mysteriously sent to her boss out of context. And worse, there were whispers of abuse. People said she had shown up to work with bruises, that she had once gone to the police but never followed through with a report. Then I found out something that made my blood run cold. I wasn't the first woman he had dated while still married, and I wasn't the first one his wife had tried to warn. The last woman he had been involved with, she had disappeared for a while. No one knew exactly what happened, but when she finally resurfaced, she had moved states and completely erased all traces of him from her life. She never spoke about it, just vanished. I knew then, I had to get out. But breaking up with Andrew wasn't going to be easy. I started by pulling away slowly, making excuses to not see him as often. He noticed immediately. He started showing up at my place unannounced, sending long texts about how much he cared about me, how he could feel me slipping away. His messages took a darker turn. He said he couldn't handle losing someone again, and that he would do anything to make sure I stayed. The night I finally ended it, he didn't take it well. We met at a coffee shop, public, safe. I told him I needed space, that things were moving too fast. His face didn't change. No anger, no sadness, just blank. Then he leaned in and said quietly, "If you leave me, I will ruin your life." I didn't respond. I just grabbed my things and left. That night, I heard tapping on my window. When I looked outside, there was no one there. But the next morning, I found deep scratches on my car door. The calls started, non-stop. Random numbers. When I blocked them, new ones popped up. I stopped answering, but one voicemail stuck with me. It was him, whispering, "I know where you sleep." I filed a police report, but they couldn't do much. He hadn't technically done anything illegal, just harassment. I changed my locks, started parking in different spots, but I never felt safe. Then one night, as I was leaving work, I saw him. He was standing across the street, just watching me. When our eyes met, he smiled. Not a normal smile. Cold, deliberate. I turned and rushed to my car. By the time I locked my doors, he was gone. That's when I knew he wasn't just mad. He was hunting me. I packed a bag and stayed with a friend. A few days later, I moved out of my apartment. New place, new job, new number. I cut all ties with mutual friends, wiped my social media. But one morning, when I opened my front door, there was a note on my welcome mat. No envelope, no name. It said, "Found you." I don't know how he did it. I don't know if he's still watching. But every night, I sleep with the lights on. I'm Mike from Miami. A few months ago, I matched with a girl named Brianna on Tinder. She was beautiful. Long brown hair, green eyes, a warm smile. Her profile seemed legit, a mix of casual selfies, vacation photos, and posts with friends. Nothing screamed fake. She had a decent number of followers, real-looking comments, and even a tagged birthday post from someone who seemed to be her cousin. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. She was funny, smart, and surprisingly open. We talked about everything: family, childhood memories, even our biggest regrets. It felt real. We had inside jokes, sent voice messages, and even did late-night FaceTime calls, though she always kept the camera angled weirdly, like she didn't want to show too much of her background. But her voice was soft and familiar, and after weeks of talking, I felt like I really knew her. At first, it was just casual flirting, but over time, it became something deeper. I found myself waking up excited to see her messages and staying up late just to keep talking. She told me about her dreams, how she wanted to open her own business, how she loved reading crime novels because they made her feel like a detective. We planned to meet in person several times. Every time, something came up. The first time, she got sick. The second time, she had a family emergency. Then work got too busy. It became a pattern. I'd get excited, we'd make plans, and then she'd cancel last minute. I started getting frustrated. I asked her if she was really serious about this, and she got defensive. She told me she was just as eager to meet, but life kept getting in the way. Her excuses were always reasonable enough that I couldn't accuse her of lying outright. Then she told me something that made me back off. She said she had an ex who stalked her, and she was terrified of meeting someone new in person. She had trust issues. That made sense to me. I told her I'd wait, that I'd be patient, that she could take all the time she needed. That's when she really opened up. She told me about the horrible things her ex had done, how he used to follow her, how he once broke into her apartment and left creepy notes. She even sent me screenshots of old texts from him, threats that made my stomach turn. I felt protective. I told her she didn't have to be afraid of me. I was different. She said she knew. One night, I asked her if she needed help. She hesitated, but then admitted she was struggling financially because of all the legal fees from trying to get a restraining order. I didn't even think twice. I offered to help. It wasn't much, just a couple $100 through Venmo. I figured if she was comfortable enough to ask, it meant she really trusted me. We kept talking, and things seemed to get better. She told me she was finally ready to meet. She even sent me a screenshot of a flight confirmation. She was coming to Miami for a weekend. I was ecstatic. The night before she was supposed to arrive, she called me, crying. She said something had happened, that her ex had found out about her travel plans and threatened her. She was scared for her life. She said she had to cancel again. At that point, something felt off. I told her I understood, but my gut was telling me something wasn't right. I didn't say anything, though. I just reassured her that she was safe, that I'd wait as long as she needed. That night, lying in bed, I started thinking about all the times she had canceled. All the times she'd dodged FaceTiming me in clear light. All the times she had perfectly reasonable excuses that kept us from meeting. Something wasn't adding up. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I opened Instagram and started searching. I knew Brianna's handle by heart, but something pushed me to dig deeper. After scrolling through some of her tagged photos, I noticed something weird. The same pictures she had sent me, the ones she said were just for me, were already posted on her profile months ago. That was strange, but not proof of anything. Then I found something that made my stomach drop. A comment on one of her older pictures from a girl who looked just like her. "Miss you, sis." I clicked the girl's profile. She had similar features, but her bio said she lived in a completely different state. Colorado, not Florida. Digging through her posts, I found the real Brianna. She had an entirely different life, a different job, and based on a post from her boyfriend's account, she wasn't single. I felt sick. I wasn't talking to Brianna. I had never been talking to Brianna. I sent her, whoever she was, a message. "Who are you really?" She didn't respond. I sent another one. "I know you're not Brianna. Just tell me the truth." Still nothing. Then, after a full hour, I got a response. "Don't text me again." That was it. No explanation, no denial. Just a cold warning. I felt like an idiot. I had shared personal things with this person. I had sent them money. But more than that, I had trusted them. At that moment, I wanted to be done with it. I blocked her profile and tried to put the whole thing behind me. But the next morning, I got a notification. An email from my bank. "Your password has been successfully changed." I froze. I hadn't changed anything. I opened my banking app, but I was locked out. I checked my other accounts, PayPal, Venmo, even my email. Every single one had password reset requests. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have done that." I broke into a cold sweat. I had no idea who I was dealing with. I called my bank immediately and froze my accounts. By the time I got access again, over $3,000 was gone. Small transactions, cash app transfers, even a few purchases in cities I'd never been to. I went straight to the police, but they weren't much help. "Internet fraud is hard to trace," they told me. "These scams are sophisticated." They took a report, but I could tell they didn't expect to get my money back. Then came the worst part. A week later, I got a call from a debt collector about a payday loan I'd never taken out. Someone had used my personal info, my full name, my address, even my social security number, to take out multiple loans in my name. Whoever I had been talking to wasn't just some scammer running a quick con. They had been planning this from the start, and I had given them everything they needed. I spent months trying to fix the damage. I had to dispute fraudulent charges, freeze my credit, even file reports with the FTC. My credit score tanked. I had to prove over and over again that I hadn't taken those loans, that I wasn't the one draining my own accounts. And the worst part? I still don't know who did it. The messages stopped, the profile disappeared, and whoever they were, they vanished without a trace. I don't use dating apps anymore. Hell, I barely trust people online at all. And if you're reading this, take it as a warning. Never ignore the red flags, because by the time you realize something is wrong, it might already be too late. I'm Sam from Minneapolis. One evening I got a text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Andrea from Tinder." I didn't remember any Andrea, but I'd been using the app on and off, so I figured I must have forgotten. I hesitated for a moment, then replied, "Hey, sorry, remind me where we matched." She answered right away, "Haha, typical. I knew you'd forget. A few days ago, you were funny, so I thought I'd reach out." The message felt a little off, but I shrugged it off. We started chatting. Nothing too deep, just the usual small talk. She said she'd recently moved to the city, didn't know many people, and was looking to meet new friends. I was bored, so I kept the conversation going. She sent a picture, just a normal selfie. Blonde hair, friendly smile, cute. I scrolled up, double-checking the chat, but there was no Tinder link. That was weird. Usually, if someone messaged from Tinder, the number had a clickable profile link. "You're not a bot, right?" I joked. She sent a laughing emoji. "Nope, definitely real. Want to grab a drink?" It was fast, but I'd had last-minute meetups before. Plus, if she really was new in town, maybe she was just eager to go out. I asked where she wanted to meet. "There's a bar on the west side, Beacons. It's chill, not too loud." I knew the place. A little run down, but safe enough. I agreed to meet at 9. At 8:45, I parked across the street. The bar wasn't busy, a few cars in the lot. I texted, "Here." No reply. I waited a few minutes, then went inside. The place was dimly lit, mostly regulars. I scanned the room. No sign of a blonde woman. Then I noticed a table in the corner. 3 guys. All of them looking right at me. I checked my phone again. Still no response from Andrea. One of the guys stood up and motioned me over. "Sam, right?" I stopped. "Yeah. Take a seat." My stomach dropped. "I'm actually waiting for someone." He smirked. "Yeah, us." I turned to leave, but another one of them stood up, blocking my path. "You're gonna want to sit down." I glanced at the bartender. He was busy wiping glasses, not paying attention. My pulse was pounding. "I think you got the wrong guy," I said, keeping my voice steady. The first guy leaned in. "Nah, you answered the text. That means you owe us." I forced a laugh. "For what? A drink I didn't even order?" No one else in the bar seemed to notice anything off. To them, it probably looked like I was just chatting with some guys I knew. But everything in me was screaming that this was bad. Really bad. "You took the bait, man," the guy in front of me said. "And now, you're in." "In what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward me. My stomach twisted. It was my Facebook profile, my work info. My recent check-ins, even my apartment complex. "Look familiar?" I swallowed hard. "We know who you are. We know where you live. And now, you're gonna help us out." I stood up. "I'm leaving." The guy closest to me grabbed my wrist, just for a second, just long enough to make it clear he could stop me if he wanted to. Then he let go. "Go ahead. Walk out," he said, leaning back in his chair. "We'll be seeing you soon, either way." I turned and left, my hands shaking as I pushed open the door. I walked straight to my car, got in, and locked the doors. I looked at my phone again. A new message from the same number. "Be smart, Sam. We'll talk soon." I barely slept that night. Every sound outside made me jump. I kept checking my locks, glancing at my phone, expecting another message. Nothing. The next morning I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was just some stupid scam, some guys trying to mess with me. But the way they had my information? That wasn't random. They had done their homework. I debated going to the police, but what would I even say? Some guys tricked me into meeting them at a bar and scared me. I had no proof they did anything illegal. At noon, my phone buzzed. Another message. "Let's make this easy. $500 by tonight, or we come to you." I stared at it, my mouth dry. I was being extorted. By who? Some small-time criminals? A gang? I had no idea. I didn't respond. A few minutes later, my phone rang, an unknown number. I ignored it. Then another text. "Don't ignore us. We're serious." I left work early, feeling sick. When I got home, I scanned the parking lot, the hallway, checking for anything unusual. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my apartment door. And then I saw it. A single envelope slid under my door. I picked it up slowly. No name, no address. Inside was a single printed photo. A picture of my building, my unit, my car in the lot. I locked the door, my heart pounding. They weren't bluffing. They had been here. I sat on my couch trying to think. If I paid, what then? Would they go away? Or would they just keep demanding more? I had no choice. I called the police. I explained everything, step by step. The messages, the meeting, the threats. The officer on the line sounded unimpressed. "Do you actually know who these people are?" "No," I admitted. "But they know me. My address, my job. Unfortunately, without proof that they've committed a crime, there's not much we can do." "Threatening me isn't a crime," I snapped. "Unless they actually act on it, it's a gray area," the officer said. "If something happens, call us." I hung up, shaking with frustration. I was on my own. That night, I didn't sleep. Every noise outside made my stomach twist. I kept my phone on silent, the screen lighting up with unread messages. The next morning, I called in sick to work and packed a bag. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for them to show up. I drove 3 hours to a friend's place in Duluth, turned off my phone, and tried to breathe. Days passed. No calls, no messages. I started to think maybe I had scared them off by disappearing. Then, a week later, I checked my mailbox. A new envelope. No return address. Inside was a single note. Running doesn't change anything. I left Minneapolis that night. I changed my number. I deleted my social media. I moved across the country. It's been 2 years. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I heard a knock at my door. I don't use dating apps anymore. I'm Vicky from Sacramento. A few months ago, I met Brian on a dating app. He was the perfect guy. Charming, well-spoken, great sense of humor. He worked in finance, or at least that's what he told me. He took me to nice restaurants, always paid, and treated me like I was the only girl in the world. Everything about him felt effortless, like he wasn't even trying to impress me, and that made him even more attractive. It didn't take long before I started falling for him. We spent almost every weekend together. He wasn't big on social media, which I actually liked. He said he preferred real connections over the fake world of Instagram. His place was always spotless, almost like a hotel room. Minimal decor, nothing personal on the walls. When I asked about it, he just laughed and said he didn't spend enough time at home to make it cozy. He'd rather be out, experiencing life. One night, we were watching a movie at my place when he got a call. He glanced at the screen, silenced it, and put his phone face down on the table. I didn't think much of it at first, but he got noticeably tense after that. He barely paid attention to the movie, kept checking the time, and eventually made an excuse that he had an early meeting and had to go. I remember standing by my window and watching him drive away, that uneasy feeling creeping in for the first time. A few days later, I was at the gym when the news was playing on one of the TVs. I wasn't really paying attention until I heard the words, "Police search for suspect." I turned to look. The screen showed a blurry security camera photo of a man leaving a parking garage. Something about him looked eerily familiar. The jawline, the posture. It reminded me of Brian. My stomach clenched, but I told myself I was being paranoid. The guy in the footage was wanted in connection to multiple disappearances, all women who had gone missing in the last year. I laughed at myself for even considering it. Brian was sweet, caring. He wasn't the type of guy who could hurt anyone. I tried to shake it off, but that night, lying in bed, the image of that blurry figure wouldn't leave my mind. The resemblance was too strong. I pulled up my phone and searched for more news articles. One of them had a slightly clearer image. My breath caught in my throat. It looked just like him. Same build, same haircut. Even the jacket looked familiar. I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, but deep down, something in me knew. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I was in a fog. I didn't know what to do. Confront him? That felt crazy. Go to the police? And say what? My boyfriend kind of looks like a guy in a blurry security cam photo. I decided to just act normal, keep my distance, and see if anything else felt off. A week passed, and I started convincing myself I'd overreacted. And then, out of nowhere, there was a knock at my door. It was early, just past 7 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw 2 men in plain clothes, but their stance and the way they scanned the hallway told me they were cops. My stomach flipped. I opened the door, and one of them flashed a badge. "Miss Carter?" "Yes?" "We'd like to ask you a few questions about Brian Walker." I froze. My mouth went dry. Hearing them say his name out loud like that made it real. Yeah, sure, come in." They stepped inside, their expressions calm but firm. One of them pulled out a small notebook. "How long have you known Brian?" "About 3 months," I said, my voice sounding small. "How often do you see him?" "Maybe once or twice a week." "Why?" What's going on? The other officer glanced at his partner before speaking. Brian is under investigation for possible involvement in multiple criminal cases. We can't go into detail, but we need to know if you've ever noticed anything unusual about him. Strange behavior, anything suspicious. My hands were cold. What kind of criminal cases? The first officer hesitated. There have been a series of missing persons cases, women, and we have reason to believe Brian might be connected. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I thought about the news report, the blurry photo. I wanted to tell them everything, but at the same time, I felt this overwhelming sense of betrayal. The Brian I knew couldn't be that guy. It had to be a mistake. I don't know, I said finally. He's always been normal with me. Kind, even. This doesn't make any sense. The officers exchanged another look. If you see him, or if anything seems off, we need you to call us immediately, one of them said, handing me a card. I nodded, still in shock. They left soon after, and I stood there, gripping the card, my mind racing. When Brian texted me later that day, acting like nothing had happened, my hands shook as I typed my reply. I knew I had to talk to Brian. I had to hear his side of things. Maybe it was all a huge misunderstanding. Maybe someone was setting him up. I needed to believe that. We met at a cafe, and as soon as he sat down across from me, I could tell something was different. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His usual easygoing confidence was replaced by something else. Tension. You okay? He asked, stirring his coffee like he wasn't being investigated by the police. I swallowed hard. Brian, 2 detectives came to my apartment this morning. They're asking about you. His hand froze for just a second before he set the spoon down. What did you tell them? Just that I didn't know anything. He nodded slowly. Good. That single word sent a chill through me. I leaned in. Brian, what's going on? They said you might be connected to missing women. Tell me this is a mistake. He sighed, rubbing his temples. It's ridiculous, Vicky. I told you, I work in finance. I barely have time to sleep, let alone... He let out a bitter laugh. Jesus, missing women? Then why do they think it's you? He didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, like he was trying to decide something. Then he reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was a little too tight. You trust me, don't you? The words should have reassured me. Instead, they felt like a warning. I forced a nod. Of course. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something wasn't right. I needed to know the truth. The next time I saw Brian, I made sure to pay attention to everything. The way he talked, the things he said, the way he moved. That's when I saw it. We were walking to his car when I noticed a black duffel bag in the back seat. It was partially unzipped. Inside, I saw rope, duct tape, a box cutter. My stomach dropped. What's that for? He followed my gaze and chuckled. Oh, my buddy's moving. Just helping him pack. I forced a smile, but my entire body was screaming at me to run. That was the last time I saw him. A few days later, I came home to find my apartment door cracked open. My heart pounded as I stepped inside. My living room was trashed, drawers pulled out, papers everywhere, my laptop gone. Someone had been searching for something. I knew who it was. I called the police. When they arrived, I told them everything. About the bag, about my gut feeling, about how Brian suddenly seemed like a stranger to me. They listened. They took my statement. But Brian was already gone. The last thing they told me before they left chilled me to the bone. He knows you talked to us. Be careful. That was 3 months ago. Brian disappeared. No credit card activity. No social media. Nothing. I moved to a new place, changed my number, and started locking my doors twice. But every time I walk outside, I feel like I'm being watched. The scariest part? They never caught him. Kate lived in Savannah, Georgia. She was 26, independent, and had a solid group of friends. She wasn't the type to obsess over dating apps, but sometimes, after a long day at work, she'd swipe through Tinder just for fun. That's how she met Dylan. He was a little older, 31, with a decent job in finance, or so he claimed. His pictures were normal: gym selfies, a dog, a couple of travel shots. He messaged her first, and they started chatting. He was funny, a little awkward, but charming in a way that felt genuine. After a week of texting, they met for dinner at a casual bar downtown. The date wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. Dylan was polite but intense. He kept steering the conversation towards serious topics, asking her about past relationships, if she ever felt unsafe dating strangers, what she'd do if a guy made her uncomfortable. She laughed it off at first, thinking he was just being protective, but something about the way he asked unsettled her. By the end of the night, she knew she wouldn't see him again. He didn't do anything overtly creepy, but his energy was off. Too eager, too focused on locking down a second date before they even finished their drinks. She gave him a polite excuse. Work was crazy. She wasn't looking for anything serious. He seemed disappointed but took it well, or so she thought. The next day, he texted her in the morning, then again at lunch, then after work. Kate responded once, saying she was busy, but he kept messaging. By midnight, he had sent at least 10 texts, all variations of, "Did I do something wrong? I thought we had a great time. Please just tell me what happened." She muted his notifications and went to sleep. When she woke up, there were 20 more. Over the next few days, the messages didn't stop. They only got weirder. "I feel like I deserve an explanation. It's so rude to ghost someone. I thought you were better than this." Kate blocked his number. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. That night, she got a message from an unknown number. "Wow, really? Blocking me?" She blocked that one too. Then, a day later, another message from a different number. "I just want to talk." Her stomach knotted. She blocked it without responding. The next morning, she woke up to a notification on Instagram. Dylan had requested to follow her. She ignored it. An hour later, a Facebook friend request, then a LinkedIn invite. She blocked him on everything. That evening, as she walked home from work, she got a text from an unknown number again. "You look cute in that green dress." Her blood ran cold. She was wearing a green dress. Kate spun around, scanning the street, but it was busy. Dozens of people walked past her, cars honked, life moved normally. But someone was watching her. She rushed home, locked her doors, and called her best friend, Jess. "This is insane," Jess said. "You should go to the police." Kate hesitated. What could she even say? Some guy from Tinder was being creepy? He hadn't threatened her. He hadn't done anything illegal. Still, she didn't sleep well that night. Every creak in her apartment made her jolt awake. Her phone stayed on silent, but she knew more messages were coming. By the end of the week, she changed her number. For a few days, things were quiet. No texts, no new accounts. She started to relax, convincing herself that he had finally given up. Then, one evening, she came home to find something tucked under her apartment door. A single sheet of paper. "You can't ignore me forever." She gasped and dropped it. Her hands shook as she dialed Jess. "He was here," she whispered. "He knows where I live." Jess was at her apartment in 10 minutes, furious and scared. They called the police. An officer came by, took her statement, and shrugged. "There's not much we can do unless he actually does something." Kate felt sick. That night, Jess stayed over. They triple-checked the locks. Kate barely slept. By morning, she had convinced herself she was being paranoid. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't even him. But then, on her way to work, she saw him. Dylan. Standing on the opposite sidewalk, staring at her. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't smile, just watched. Her breath hitched. She picked up her pace, heart pounding, and ducked into a coffee shop. She waited, watching the street. After 10 minutes, he was gone. That night, she ordered a security camera for her door, but it wouldn't be enough, because Dylan wasn't going away. A week later, Kate's neighbors saw her arguing with a man outside her apartment. It was late, past midnight. A few people heard raised voices but didn't think much of it. Disagreements happened all the time. One neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, an older woman who lived across the hall, later told police that she had opened her door slightly, just enough to peek outside. She saw Kate standing with a tall man, short, dark hair, wearing a hoodie. He was leaning in too close, speaking in a low, forceful voice. Kate had her arms crossed, her body angled away. She looked nervous, Mrs. Holloway recalled, like she didn't want him there. Another neighbor, a guy from the second floor, walked past them on his way up. He remembered Kate shaking her head, saying, "You need to leave." The man didn't. Instead, he grabbed her wrist. The neighbor hesitated for a moment, debating whether to step in. Then Kate yanked her hand away and snapped, "I said no, Dylan." Dylan. That was the first time anyone heard his name. The neighbor made eye contact with her, a silent question. "Are you okay?" Kate gave him a tight, uncomfortable smile. "I'm fine," she muttered. So he kept walking. That was the last time anyone saw Kate alive. The next morning, Kate didn't show up for work. That wasn't like her. She was the type to text if she was even 5 minutes late. Her best friend, Jess, called. No answer. Texted. No response. By noon, Jess had a terrible feeling in her gut. She left work early and drove to Kate's apartment. She knocked, rang the bell. No answer. Then she checked with the building manager. He agreed to open the door. The apartment was empty. Nothing looked disturbed. No signs of a struggle, no broken locks. But Kate's phone was still on the kitchen counter, her purse beside it. Jess knew, in that instant, that something was very, very wrong. She called the police. An official missing person report was filed that evening. Officers canvassed the area, asking neighbors if they'd seen anything. That's when Mrs. Holloway and the guy from the second floor told them about Dylan. Jess, shaking with rage and fear, gave the police his full name. They ran it. No criminal record. No known address. The phone number Kate had for him was a burner. Dylan was nowhere to be found. 3 days later, security footage surfaced. A grainy black and white clip from a traffic camera 2 streets over. It showed Kate walking quickly, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. A dark figure followed a few steps behind. Then he lunged. The footage wasn't clear, but it was obvious what happened. Dylan grabbed Kate from behind. She struggled. He forced her toward a parked car. She kicked, twisted, tried to break free. No one was around to see it happen. Within seconds, he shoved her into the car and drove off. A month passed before they found her body. She was deep in the woods, miles outside the city. A hiker came across something partially buried near a tree, a pale hand sticking out of the dirt. He called the police immediately. The crime scene was brutal. Kate had been strangled. The medical examiner estimated she had died the same night she was taken. Dylan was gone. There was no trace of him anywhere. His bank accounts were untouched. His phone had been tossed near a highway, wiped clean. No one even knew if Dylan was his real name. The case remains open, but leads have gone cold. Kate's family still searches for answers. Her friends live with the weight of what-ifs. And the neighbors, especially the one who saw her argue with Dylan that night, struggle with guilt. Because if he had done something, stepped in, called the police right then, maybe Kate would still be alive. It's terrifying how something as small as a single Tinder match can turn into a nightmare. If someone makes you uncomfortable, if they seem too intense, too persistent, too unwilling to take no for an answer, trust your gut. Because some people don't just move on. Some people refuse to let go. And sometimes, blocking a number isn't enough to save your life.